We are now going to fly the pattern at the Spirit of St. Louis Airport. Before we fly the pattern, if you haven't reviewed the video titled The Pattern, Background Information, you may want to do that now to get details on things to be aware of when flying the pattern. As we review the airport information on airnav.com, we see that the airport elevation is 463 feet and the traffic pattern for runway 8 left is 837 feet above ground level. So adding 837 feet to 463 feet gives us the traffic pattern altitude of 1,300 feet. We also see that the traffic pattern for 8 left is a left or standard pattern. After doing the pre-flight, before start and starting checklists, and checking ATIS, where we learned that runways 8 left and 8 right are the active runways, we are now ready to talk to ground so we can taxi to the runway. Because we want to stay in the pattern, we need to let ground know our intentions. When making the request to ground, say something like this: Spirit Ground, Cessna November 20905 Kilo at General Aviation Parking near the flight school with information Bravo. Request taxi to the active for pattern work. After you have gotten taxi instructions from ground, taxi to the runway and make the call to tower. Spirit Tower, Cessna November 20905 Kilo at runway 8 left, ready for closed traffic. Tower will respond with something like this: Cessna 905 Kilo, left closed traffic approved, runway 8 left, cleared for takeoff. Repeat the instructions. Cleared for takeoff, runway 8 left, left closed traffic, Cessna 905 Kilo. Taxi onto the runway and line up with the center line. When you look at your heading indicator, note there are two ways to track your turns. One is to note the 4 headings you will turn to, although this is a little hard to remember. In our case, with the left pattern, you will start with 8 on the upwind. Remember, 8 on the heading indicator matches up with the runway number you are facing, which is 8 left. Then we'll turn to 35 on crosswind, 26 on downwind, 17 on base, and then back to 8 on final. Or you can just keep track of where the 8 is as you make each turn as the heading indicator turns clockwise on the left pattern. So we start with 8 on the upwind at the top, then 8 will be 90 degrees to the right on the crosswind, and then 90 degrees at the bottom of the heading indicator on the downwind, and then 8 will be 90 degrees to the left on base, and then 8 will be back on the top for final. Some pilots might set the heading bug, if there is one, to the runway number to keep track using this method, so they can watch the heading bug go to each quarter of the heading indicator as they turn. Of course, all of this would be reversed if you were flying the right pattern. Go ahead and take off. Our first turn needs to be 300 feet below the traffic pattern altitude of 1,300 feet, so we will turn about 1,000 feet MSL. After the turn to crosswind is completed, I will raise the wing to check for any traffic to make sure it is clear. Now I'll turn on downwind, and if I haven't done so already, adjust my speed to 90 knots. Next, I'll perform the before landing checklist. Seats, seat belts secure, fuel selector both, mixture rich, carb heat on. Now when I get a beam of the runway, I will reduce power to 1700 RPM, add 10 degrees of flaps, and pitch for 80 knots. At some point on the downwind, before you turn to base, you should hear from the tower. They may say something like this: Cessna 905 Kilo, cleared for the option. Cleared for the option means we can do a touch and go, a stop and go, or a full stop landing. In this video, we will do the full stop landing, but we'll cover the touch and go and stop and go in other videos. Do not turn to base until you receive landing clearance from the tower. After you get the clearance, repeat back to tower. Cleared for the option Cessna 905 Kilo. If we don't hear from the tower before we turn base, then it's time to talk to them by saying, Spirit Tower, Cessna November 20905 Kilo, on the downwind. Am I cleared for the option? I'll now look to see when I'm 45 degrees from the runway numbers and then turn to base. After turning to base, I'll add 20-degree flaps and pitch for 70 knots. Then I'll keep my eye on the runway to make sure I turn early enough to line up with the runway. Once I've turned to final, I will add remaining flaps and pitch for 60 knots and then do a normal landing. Once I've cleared the runway, I can then request to taxi back to general aviation parking, or I can, as I did before, request to fly the pattern again by saying the following. Spirit Tower, 905 Kilo, clear of runway 8 left, request taxi back to runway 8 left for pattern work. Subscribe to this channel to learn more.